Thanks everybody. I'm really pleased to be introducing Margie O'Driscoll today. I'm not sure what Margie is going to talk about because she has an incredibly broad background, including study of philosophy, teaching about art and communication. From kind of this multidisciplinary background, she did a Masters of Public Administration at Columbia University and then has made a big splash in the world of architecture. Margie O'Driscoll was the Executive Director of the American Institute of Architects San Francisco chapter for 12 years. She has founded a Festival of Sustainable Architecture in San Francisco, and she has really interesting video material on her LinkedIn site, including information about net zero green buildings. And I'm fascinated to hear what she has to say about effective communication, design, and architecture and engineering today. So if you could please welcome Margie O'Driscoll. Thank you.
Thank you. So thanks, Joshua. I'm really honored to be here. I'm slightly in awe of all of you. I've never studied engineering. I'm truly as awed as probably your parents and your family is when you start to talk about what your work is like. I'm actually going to start today by sharing my personal 2017 resolution, which is to introduce myself in a different kind of way that doesn't relate specifically to what I'm going to talk about today. But I just feel like I need to say this. I'm the child of an immigrant, I'm married to an immigrant, and I have been an immigrant. And I feel like I need to say that today sort of more than ever. So thank you. Okay, so let me talk about what I'm going to really be talking about today, which is how I built a career without having any idea of what that career was going to be. How we created some social change along the way, and how we've changed the face of San Francisco through some of the work and interventions that I'm going to talk about. I think it's about living a life with intention and a life with goals that are just consistently changing. So I hope you just sit back, enjoy the ride, ask some questions when we get to the end of it. I'm going to try and leave time for you to ask questions about exactly how did that lead to that. And I'm going to give you some great advice that people gave to me early on in my career, which you can take or reject, or hopefully build upon and make something better about yourself, with yourself and your career. So the first slide I'm going to show you is where I grew up. I grew up in a little town on the other side of the Golden Gate Bridge. Doesn't really matter where it is, except that it grounds me in the Bay Area. I was born in 1960, and so my life was around of growing up was in the 60s and 70s. It's all ancient history, I know, to all of you. But so here's some of the things that were radical in the 60s and 70s when I was growing up. First of all, the idea that wealth did not equate to happiness. That had really been the way my parents were raised, and that was very much part of the American dream. And it was abundantly clear to me growing up that rich people were some of the most unhappy people I'd ever met. And so aspiring to that didn't seem like a good goal for me. So that sort of set my world notion. I also learned early on that people could have multiple careers, that they could do different things in their life. That, again, was a different notion in that period of time. Obviously, it doesn't sound different to all of you, but for my parents, for example, the job that they studied in college is what they did till they retired. And so that the whole idea that you could do different things with your life was a great revelation at that period of time. People could also have unusual careers. So in the town that I grew up in, the richest people were rock musicians. Okay, that was not very American at the time. I can absolutely assure you of that. Most people who were rich were people who worked in real estate or finance. Also, having a full life meant reinventing yourself and changing who you were. And so that meant there was a time and an openness and fluidity to thinking about gender, thinking about people having multiple families, new definitions of what families were about. That was all starting to have its rise at that period of time. A couple of great pieces of advice I got along the way. The first was from my mom, and you should always listen to everything your mom says. So my mom said, in life, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And that undergirds much of my career. And I think as you begin your careers, and you've probably all started your careers now, it will help you very much along the way. And I'm going to actually talk to you specifically about how one person ended up helping me along the way, and another person, how those people really matter. The other great piece of advice that I got from one of my early mentors was always have your elevator pitch. Who are you? What are you doing? What are you thinking about? Always have that elevator pitch, because you never know who's going to be in the elevator with you. Even in a campus like this where I didn't have to take the elevator to get there, you still are going to ride elevators. You're just going to be with people. So being able to say who you are is actually really important. So anybody know who this guy is here? Anybody know who that is? Okay, that's our governor. But the reason you can't recognize him is this photo was taken when he was governor when I was your age. Well, even younger than you are now. Okay, that's Governor Jerry Brown, and I'm sure you don't know who the woman is with him. That would be Linda Ronstadt. When I asked my 18-year-old if he knew who that was, he said, "You're out of mind, I have no idea." I said, "Well, who's the pop star who you think is like, you know, the pop star that everybody would possibly know?" And he said, "Beyonce." He said, "Oh, so the governor's sitting with Beyonce?" And I said, "Let me take that even one step farther. That was his girlfriend." So the governor was dating the most popular female rock star of the time, during the time that I was growing up. So that was just like a radical notion, because we were coming out of an age of having Richard Nixon. And if you can think about who I want to spare you that imagery up there and the knowledge of that whole fiasco, but that you could actually have somebody who was young and hip and actually knew and was involved with and clearly knew about the rock and roll scene was pretty extraordinary. Okay, so why am I going to talk about this governor? Why is that all ancient history? Well, actually, it plays forward to today. Did anyone happen to hear the governor's speech to the Geophysicists Union in December? Anybody hear that speech? Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Okay, so when he was governor, he had a strong interest in environmental issues. He started the first Office of Appropriate Technology. He hired a radical thinker named Stuart Brand, who was widely considered the most progressive thinker in the world at that time. He also started the California Arts Council and appointed more women and people of color to office than any other governor in California history. He also sponsored the first tax incentive for rooftop solar and environmental initiatives, and he also proposed the establishment of a state space academy, which included purchasing a satellite that would be launched into orbit to provide emergency communications around the state. Which actually ended up happening. The governor in December gave a challenge to our president to say that if the president pulled down satellites and stopped tracking climate change, California would launch its own damn satellite. So come full circle to a governor 35 years later, essentially saying satellites are our future, and that technology and that ability to record information is actually really important to making good public policy decisions. So the other thing about the governor is that the state of California in the 70s had built a huge 20,000 square foot governor's mansion for the new governor, and it was finished just before he was elected, and he said, "Nah, not for me." And he lived in a Spartan one-bedroom apartment a block from the Capitol, and he didn't drive the limousine that a governor drove. So all these things were just considered to be so radical and so different. But it was really the beginning of, in the 70s, this idea of living within limits. And that was further fueled by the gasoline shortage, which racked the country. Jimmy Carter was president at that period of time. He gave a speech during that time saying that the U.S. energy crisis during the 70s was the moral equivalent of war. He encouraged energy conservations, installed solar water heating and solar panels on the top of the White House, which would then be removed by President Reagan, which then got put back under President Obama. And President Carter also advocated everyone wearing sweaters as a response to turning down the heat in the White House. What's important about this is it was sort of the first time in the U.S. that we were starting to think that we were not the rulers of the universe. We were not the people who could use up whatever we had. And that greatly shaped my thinking going forward in my career. Okay, so now I want to really talk about you and things that you're probably wondering about. So As you heard earlier, I studied philosophy, and many people said to me at the time, does your major matter to you? You all obviously are all going to change the world because you're engineers. I knew that I didn't have the chops at all to do that kind of work, so I just followed what I loved, and that was philosophy. And my parents were appalled, and I was at school at Berkeley, and they said, well, we're so done with that. If you want to study something that ridiculous, you got to pay your own way. And so I did. That was an opportunity for me, because you could do it in those days by working full-time and going to school full-time. I think that we have done all of you and a whole generation a disservice by making sure that can't happen anymore. And it's something I feel pretty strongly about. But anyway, I'm not going to sort of go down that path. That's not what we're here to talk about. But anyway, so I said philosophy. At Cal at that time, they thought, yeah, Margie, your parents are probably right. You're never going to find a job as a philosopher, so you need to do an internship. So we were required to do an internship. I didn't know what I wanted to do. It wasn't like I could go sit at the feet of Socrates or Aristotle and get an education. So what was I going to do? So I went to my counselor and I said, okay, I got to do an internship. She said, okay, well, you know what? You're supposed to have done this 6 weeks ago. You're like way behind schedule. I got a friend who I'm going to call, and maybe she's got room for you in her office. And I was like, okay, great. I'll do whatever. So she sent me over to her friend, who was then the director of the California Democratic Party. And they said, do you need any help? And they're like, oh yeah, great, stuffing envelopes, doing that kind of thing. I was like, great, I just got this internship, it'll all be fine. Well, what I didn't really expect or really know, let me just show you this next slide. I love the ridiculousness of these rabbits in front of San Francisco City Hall. Anyway, but what I didn't realize is that would actually become a really interesting trajectory for me. I would meet all kinds of interesting people along the way, working within politics. So when I graduated from college, I did this internship for about 2 years, and I graduated, and I thought, okay, now what am I going to do with my life? And there was a job open for an organization called Save the Bay. So Save the Bay, a really interesting organization. After the gold rush, due to the huge filling of shallow areas around the San Francisco Bay, the San Francisco Bay was reduced by a third, and 90% of the bay's tidal marshes were destroyed. By 1961, there were plans to fill 60% of the remaining bay, leaving only a narrow channel for navigation. So if you can imagine the San Francisco Bay being reduced to something about as wide as the area underneath the Golden Gate Bridge, that was the plan. The public had access to fewer than 6 miles of shoreline in the 180 miles that we have today. And the bay was choked with raw sewage and industrial pollution. It was disgusting. So in 1961, 3 East Bay women, Kay Kerr, Sylvia McLaughlin, and Esther Golick, let me show you a picture of a couple of them. There you go. They made phone calls, they wrote letters, they held meetings, and they collected $1 each from thousands of San Francisco Bay Area residents to create Save the San Francisco Bay Association. By mobilizing citizens, they won all kinds of landmark victories, including a legislative moratorium against filling in the bay. They closed more than 30 city garbage dumps, halted the practice of dumping raw sewage in the bay, and established a regulatory agency called the Bay Conservation and Development Commission. And last year, Save the Bay was one of the leading proponents of parcel tax AA, which is the first time in the Bay Area's history, and perhaps even in the nation's history, where we decided to tax ourselves for cleaning up the bay and keeping the bay as a safe place and creating more recreational opportunities. So why do I say the greatest gift of all is not getting what you want? So I was person number 2 to be the director of this organization, and I was not hired. I was bummed. To me, this was like the ultimate devastation. This is really what I wanted to do. It was a great mission and a great organization. So when I went back and talked to these lovely ladies about why they didn't hire me, they said, well, we're not going to hire you because you're not yet 21, and we need to have somebody who's 21 lead this organization. That was legal at the time. There's nothing I could do about it. So I thought, okay, what am I going to do next? So I went to Alaska and worked on a fishing boat. because that was the most ridiculous thing I could think of to do. That's what my friends were doing, and we knew we could make a lot of money. This isn't my boat, but it's a very similar boat. So I worked on Alaska as a longliner on a fishing boat, made enough of a sort of pot of money to settle myself when I got back to San Francisco, and on the way broke my ankle in half and ended up in a cast. So to further my hopes of not getting a job, I would have to go to job interviews in a cast that was literally from my toe to my hip, and I couldn't walk in it. So I thought, what on earth am I going to do? So I came back, and I went back to where I had my first internship, and I said, hey, I know you really liked working with me before. I can sit at a desk. I can't really walk around, but wouldn't you like to hire me again? And because they liked working with me, they all said, okay, fine, you can come back and do that. So I came back and worked on political campaigns for a couple of years, and then just became excruciatingly burned out from that, and got a call from somebody I met in politics, an elected official, a guy named Harry Britt, who was the only socialist on the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. And Harry said, I have a problem, and I need you to go solve that, because you have this unique set of skills. You have sort of the patience to deal with these people, and you have a good understanding of politics, and I'd like you to go and solve this problem. So the problem is really, was a group of artists owned a building in the South of Market area of San Francisco. This will resonate to you if you think about the Ghost Ship fire. There were 85 artists who lived in a 3-story building at 19th and Alabama Street in San Francisco. And there are about 100 artists who lived in these 85 spaces, 2 theaters. This is the gallery space called Southern Exposure. And the city of San Francisco had condemned the building. And the city said, you know what, we don't want artists to be living in a building. No one can live in a industrial building. This was just unfathomable to the city. And I said, hey, wait a minute, there's not, artists need a particular kind of space. They can't live in a standard 1-bedroom apartment if they're making as you can see, 20-foot square painting there. They can't bring that out of the building. So we need to think out of the box here. We need to create some solutions. So the supervisor who asked me to go over there and work with the artists and said to me, the answer to this solution, or the answer that you will find, is that you need to work with the artists and come up with a special piece of legislation that I will pass and I will carry through the Board of Supervisors. And you know how to write that legislation, so that's what you need to go over there and do. So I got in there, and the more I got into it, the more I realized that it wasn't just Project Artaud. There are a bunch of other artists living in these industrial buildings, and we could come up with an incremental solution that would save this particular group of artists, or we could look at the problem holistically and say, okay, how can we actually think about keeping artists in a community? Because they need a particular kind of space. And for those of you who do music, people who have to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and go to work don't necessarily like music next to you. How do you live in a city where you want to keep an arts community, but there's different kinds of uses, and how do you respect that and keep that? So after about 2 months, I realized that the solution to the problem was not legislation, but it was actually rewriting the city building code. I had no idea of what the building code was. I'd never done anything like that, but I managed to convince the chief building inspector that this would be the most creative project of his entire life, and he and I rewrote the Live Work Building Code for San Francisco, which is now the national model for the rest of the country. And the most important thing for you to know about this is that what we thought the answer was not the answer. We got to the right solution, but it was through a very different path, and that was rewriting this legislation, which is now being adapted finally in Oakland and a variety of other places around the country. But it serves as the model in Boston, New York, and many cities around the country. So that was fun. That was really cool. And once I sort of had scored that kind of victory for the arts community, they mistakenly thought I could do anything. And let me just assure you what a mistake that was. So the next call that I got was from a group of artists at the Ultimate Tilting at Windmills project. And so the artists called me and they said, we are 350 artists. We don't live, but we work out at a place called the Hunters Point Naval Shipyard. And we need some help because the mayor of San Francisco, you will sense a theme here, the mayor of San Francisco wants to homeport a nuclear battleship where we are, and we can't coexist, according to the Department of Navy. So can you save us? And I was like, okay, let me get this straight. 325 artists who don't even know each other, are not at all coalesced, are going to fight the United States Department of Navy, who wants to homeport a battleship there? Are you out of your mind? Like, the politics of that is ridiculous. I was like, you're totally crazy. But I felt like it was a chance to tilt at a windmill. And I just thought, okay, I'm just going to carry this conversation as far as I possibly can. And we'll see what happens. Because at the end of the day, if I can create a relocation plan for these artists, then that's maybe as good as I can get. I will be able to keep space for them. I will be able to keep them together. But I know that I can't keep them here. I mean, if the Navy wants to put a battleship on their land, who am I to tell the United States Department of Navy and, you know, a lot of colonels with a lot of brass, you know, that they shouldn't be able to do that. So many interesting things happen. I do a whole 1 hour, 2-hour lecture on like all the fits and starts of this whole project of the Hunters Point shipyard. But let me sort of tell you. So what happened is the artists moved in 1983. In 1985, the city and the Navy announced plans to homeport the USS Missouri. And the chief proponent of that was the then mayor of San Francisco, as well as the Department of Navy. And so what I came in and helped the artists do was get to know each other. They didn't all know each other. They came in, they did their work, they left. There were music studios there was Skateboard Magazine, there were all kinds of really interesting people, but people came, that was sort of where they went to do their work, often in a solitary way. So they didn't all know each other. So the first thing we did is we got everybody organized. And then we thought, okay, well, so let's go meet with the mayor's office and say to them, you know, hey, Madam Mayor, hey, Mayor's Chief of Staff, we know you want to bring this battleship. How about if we relocate the artist to another location? And I was actually pretty amazed I even found a location in San Francisco that could house that many industrial uses, but we did. And the mayor's office said, forget it. A bunch of artists against a nuclear battleship, forget it. We so don't even need to talk to you. And I thought, okay, I offered, now it's our little war. Not that I thought I had any leverage or any way that I could work on that. So we struck out at our quiet negotiations in the mayor's office. So then we thought, okay, what's the next thing that we can do? Okay, so the next thing we can do is get media attention. And media attention, you know, it was a different world in those days. So if you can imagine if we had no internet, we had no way of communicating to everybody we wanted to, and really the only means of communication from a powerful perspective was one newspaper, which at that time was the San Francisco Chronicle. So imagine, if you will, no internet and only an internet that was one newspaper. So we thought, okay, well, let's go meet with the editorial board of the Chronicle and we'll say, hey, we got a really great story. We've got a bunch of artists who are fighting a nuclear battleship. Don't you think you should be writing and talking instead of talking about how great this battleship is going to be, about this arts community? And wouldn't that be a great thing to talk about? And they laughed us out of the office. The reason that they laughed us out of the office is 3 of the 5 people on the editorial board had been on the USS Missouri, which was the battleship that they were going to home port here in San Francisco, and they were going to, because they were on that battleship when the World War II peace accords were signed. The emotional attachment that these 3 men had to that battleship and its import to San Francisco and the opportunity to have it here far outweighed my little ideas of trying to work with a group of artists to do that. So we effectively, and this sort of speaks to a communication strategy, we're effectively locked out of communicating to the biggest and only venue. So we were going to do. So we racked our brains. How could we do this? How could we make sure that we got this whole story that there was an artist community out there covered in a time when there were daily media stories about how great it was going to be to have this battleship in that neighborhood. So suffice to say that we cooked up an idea that I'm still to this day slightly embarrassed about, but it actually really worked. Which was, we thought, if San Francisco Chronicle is not going to cover us, who is their biggest competitor at this time? And their biggest competitor was the Los Angeles Times, not in terms of circulation, because the LA Times circulation was far greater than theirs, but the LA Times had a better reputation. The Chronicle always had this sort of slightly tawdry reputation, and the LA Times was considered to be a little more pristine. So they watched what the LA Times was doing, and we knew it was an influencer to the Chronicle. So we went to the LA Times, we went to the local reporter in San Francisco, and we said, Dan Moraine, great writer, we said, Dan, we got a great story for you. We got a story for you about how San Francisco hates the arts and how we're about to throw these artists out of this great community, and the city wouldn't even talk about a relocation strategy. And Dan said, love it. It was a front page story on the LA Times. And it completely embarrassed the San Francisco Chronicle. And so they felt like, well, gee, if the LA Times is doing a front page story and a huge insert in their calendar magazine, I guess we better start covering it. And so that became the chipping away of what had essentially been a media blackout for us. You can't imagine what that's like in this day of the internet when you can control media, but in those days we couldn't control it, and there was really only one place we could go. So that was a really important communication strategy that helped shift the dialogue and have people actually look at and think and care about this whole arts community. Did that really matter at the end of the day? Yeah, got us some good press. That was really great. But the forces of homeporting were far greater than we were. One of our next strategies was to invite, the Navy doubled down and wouldn't allow anybody onto the base. So if you had wanted to go to the shipyard in those days, you would have never been able to get inside the gate. And that helped make sure that you could control what people knew about what was actually happening in there. So we started a practice of actually bringing people who we thought were sort of communicators and decision makers and influencers on tours of the Hunters Point shipyard. So one day I got a call from somebody who said, I hear you're doing these tours and I've never been out there and I'd like to come and meet these artists and meet these business people. I said, okay, what's your name? Oh, it's Claude Everhart. I was like, Claude, okay. So, tell me a little bit about you. And he said, I work for our assemblyman. So it was the assembly member for that district wanted a tour here. So I said, great, wonderful, love to have him. So we came and we spent what was supposed to be 45 minutes, and we spent about 5 hours walking through the shipyard, seeing the artists, meeting the people who were working there, meeting the small businesses. And that experience had that assemblyman fall in love with the issue and come out, was really the first person to come out and say, I think homeporting is a bad deal and bad for the city, and I think we need to protect this whole artist community. So suffice to say that at the end of the day, a couple years later, the U.S. Navy decided not to homeport the USS Missouri, and it became mothballed, and it lives now in Hawaii. And the artists are still there all these years later. If you would like to go and visit them, they do open studios in April and October. And there are still about 350 artists out there. It's one of the great prides of my life that those people are all still there, because it's really the last affordable space to create art in San Francisco. So the other thing that happened as a part of that assemblyman, like any true politician, was interested in thinking about his career, and he ended up running for mayor. His name was Art Agnos, and he asked me to come work for him and to work in the mayor's office. And I said, no. To me, that was going off to the dark side. I had spent all these years essentially tilting at windmills and fighting City Hall, and the idea of actually going and working there was really like, oh my God, what does that mean about giving up my values? And at the end of the day, he convinced me that I should go and work for him because he said cities can change and opportunities can arise and things that we can't know today could actually be influenced. And San Francisco should have a strong advocate for the arts within its administration. So come try it. Come try and work for me for 3 months. And so I did. So I went to go work for him in October of 1989. Anybody know what happened in October of 1989? Yeah, somebody said this. 3 weeks after I got there, we had the Loma Prieta earthquake. I was so new I didn't even have a business card, so the National Guard wouldn't let me into the emergency headquarters because I couldn't believe that someone wearing red high tops, which is what I was wearing at the time, could possibly be on the mayor's staff. But anyway, so what I want to talk about in working in the mayor's office was how cities can change. So, anybody know what this is a picture of? It's a little hard to see here, but the area on the far left is the Embarcadero Freeway. And so the Embarcadero Freeway, this is the Justin Herman Plaza here. If you've ever been to marches or gone to ice skating, that's where that happened. And this is the Golden Gateway Project. So in the 1989 earthquake, the Embarcadero Freeway, which is the area on the far right, and also this part of the freeway here, would collapse. And at that time, San Francisco, like any city after an earthquake, everyone wants to rebuild. We're so devastated by what's happened. We're so devastated at the forces of nature and earth, and that infrastructure cannot withstand these impacts. The infrastructure collapsed, and the city had this opportunity. So when When the earthquake happened, everybody, of course, wants to rebuild. Caltrans said, of course, we're going to rebuild back the freeway the way we could. And I happened to be in the office, the mayor called me and said, I have some architects coming to talk to me about what could happen if we didn't rebuild that freeway. I think it's kind of a weird idea, but would you come and listen to the conversation with us? And so it was the director of the American Institute of Architects, and he would come with this idea, which is that freeway could come down and we could have an openness to San Francisco in front of the Ferry Building. You guys have probably all seen the Ferry Building. But anyway, to open that up and get rid of this freeway along the bay and actually open it up so that people could walk and talk and participate with and engage with life along the bay in a new and different way. And so that's what ended up happening. That was really exciting. That was really a great thing about being in the mayor's office. The bad thing about working in the mayor's offices is mayors sometimes don't get elected, and that's what happened. So the mayor ended up not being reelected in large part because certain communities were afraid that not rebuilding the freeway would devastate their particular areas economically, and so the mayor lost. Okay, so what's somebody to do who worked in the mayor's office who's not interested in working for the next mayor? I did the only thing I could think of to do at that time, which was I got married, I had 2 kids, I lived abroad, and then I came back to the United States because I was recruited to do a different kind of job, really complicated, but having to do with rechanging and rethinking another landscape. And so this landscape, I'm not sure if you can recognize where that is, that's a Golden Gate Bridge behind it, is Crissy Field. So the Evelyn and Walter Haas Jr. Fund, which is a really progressive, great foundation in San Francisco, recruited me to come and work for 2 years on their biggest financial investment, the biggest investment that had been made by philanthropy, to transform this military base into this park. It was extremely complicated. There was a lot of pressure from people who lived in the neighborhood who wanted to keep the base private and not open it up to the general public. They felt like it was their private little playground, and they didn't want people there on their bikes or walking along or fishing off that pier. So there was a lot of hostility to the project in its early formative years. Now about 1.2 million people a year visit Crissy Field. Raise your hand if you've ever been there. Anybody here? Yeah, it's an amazing place for doing, well, everything a San Franciscan would want to do. It's sort of our if you've ever been to Barcelona, it's like the Ramblas. You never know who you're going to run into on that street. Literally a bike running into you, or people that you might know as well. So it was an amazing gift. It was a really amazing project. It was totally wonderful. It was one of the great projects of my life. But once it was done, the idea of staying at the foundation wasn't really that interesting to me. Regular grant making was not, it was a little too slow moving for me, not really what I wanted to do. So I left the foundation and thought, I'm not sure what I'm going to do, but I'm sure something will come my way. And about 2 weeks later, something did come. The person who had been in that meeting so many years before, when I had been talking, when the mayor had this presentation about the freeway coming down, was the president of the American Institute of Architects. And we'd stayed in touch all these many years later. He called me because he was having dinner with his wife. His wife was a friend of mine who said, when this head of the AI had said, our executive directors quit, our deputy directors quit, I have no idea what to do. My girlfriend said to her husband, why don't you call Margie? She works with these crazy nonprofits. She'll come in and she'll give it to you straight. She'll tell you what you need to do going forward. So I went to go work for them for a week, and I ended up staying 12 years as the director of AI San Francisco. No one would have believed me. They had to make all kinds of deals to get me to want to take on a full-time job because I was a working mom who was really committed to spending time with her kids. The AI gave me the flexibility which I could sort of negotiate, I think, as well, to raise my sons and also work full time. So that was really important to me, and the AI gave me that opportunity. So in return, we turned AI San Francisco into a powerhouse of conversation about sustainability. It sort of led the battle for thinking about green building codes. I was part of the subsequent Mayor Gavin Newsom's plan to create the greenest building codes in San Francisco, do more LEED buildings than anywhere else in the country. We're not competitive, of course, but we wanted to have more than anybody else. It allowed me to do, as Joshua mentioned, start an architecture festival that really celebrated sustainability and that opportunity. And it also gave a home to the U.S. Green Building Council, which was literally birthed organizationally in the offices of AI San Francisco, which are a great building in downtown San Francisco in a historic building. We also did a sort of model demonstration of the first LEED office in a historic building. So really important in the transformation and creating opportunities to talk to politicians, to shape legislation, and to really shift thinking about sustainability. So then I did that for 12 years, and after 12 years I was like, yeah, I need to do something else. Again, not quite sure what that might be. And got a call. I'm sorry. One thing I just want to also mention that a big part of the work at AI San Francisco was about zero net energy and our race to get there. And so while I was at AI San Francisco, we started something called the Architecture at Zero competition, which is a great competition. We have different sites around the Bay Area. We've done affordable housing in San Francisco's Tenderloin. We did a campus expansion at UC Merced. And then we did last year student housing at San Francisco State University, all looking at how to do these really complex building types with a zero net energy focus. And so PG&E funds that. We give $25,000 in awards. If you're interested in doing a summer competition, maybe for some academic credit, really a good idea to do this competition, because we don't get a lot of people entering. So it's not that stiff a competition. I didn't really say that. Okay. Anyway, after I left AI San Francisco, what was next? So I got a call from the chief resiliency officer in San Francisco. The Rockefeller Foundation, which you've probably heard of, has an international movement of creating resiliency officers. And those are people who work within government who care about resiliency. And resiliency is a new hot topic. And it's really thinking about how cities, how counties, how regions can respond to the shocks and stressors of our environments. And so it's easy to think about the shocks and stressors here in the Bay Area, things like earthquakes, rising sea level, growing inequity. Anyway, you can sort of name a whole group of things. But those shocks and stressors are different in different communities. Other communities have hurricanes and water quality problems. Anyway, so all around the country, people have different issues, but we are all united in the understanding that cities and regions like the Bay Area become the hot button for figuring out those solutions. So following the Hurricane Sandy a couple of years ago in New York, there was a competition launched called Rebuild by Design. And 10 architecture teams from around the country were charged with going out and working really deeply within communities all around the area damaged by Hurricane Sandy and coming up with design solutions along with the community. It was widely considered the most successful design competition that had ever happened in the United States. And I had watched it from afar because I thought, this is a really cool way to do that. You're paying teams, you're asking design teams to work really deeply within community. In other words, not assuming that government has all the answers, but actually going and working with community to develop support for it. So I thought it was a really cool idea. And the chief resiliency officer from San Francisco said, hey, we're thinking about doing something similar here in the Bay Area. Would you be interested in helping us out? So I got hired 2 years ago to work on the idea of what is now the Resilient by Design Bay Area Challenge, which was funded in December by the Rockefeller Foundation for $5 million. And so we will be announcing sometime, probably late spring, early summer, a design competition to look at how to build resiliency all throughout the 9 Bay Area counties. We'll identify different sites and then send design teams to work deeply within communities to come up with solutions which are implementable, not theoretical, but implementable solutions. It's the first time that a community in the world is actually thinking in a way of how to protect communities, because some of our most vulnerable communities, with some of our scarce low-income housing, are those most subject to sea level rise and flooding, as we've all seen, not just here in San Jose, but also in Mill Valley, San Rafael, Richmond, and throughout the Bay Area. So it's a really big problem, and I think that Resilient by Design will employ design thinking and great design and engineering thinking to come up with some really great solutions. So that's how I got to where I am. So I hope you found this sort of interesting and a way that you can sort of weave a life without as rigorous of a degree as you all have. You all have a much more rigorous and marketable degree than I do, so you'll be able to do so much more than what I've been able to do. So Joshua asked me to stop here and answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Margie. Questions?
There's a question in the back.
So my question would be, you said that you had a lot of help from certain people along your way, but then it also seemed like you stayed true to your beliefs and maintained what you had said as your foundation from an early age. Would you say it was more beneficial to stay true to that, or was it also a fact of changing with time and changing with experience and things?
Yes. I think that, so I've been really lucky in life, and one of the things that as you can see, I got involved in some very political issues. I mean, and there was a lot of space for people to really disagree with me on a lot of the different positions and the different work that I did. But I always tried to say, to keep a friend, because I knew I'd come back another day to have to come and ask that member of the Board of Supervisors or a member of Congress for something else along the way. So I tried never to burn a bridge along the way. And I think that that's a really important thing to say. And I think one of the things that's hard when you're an activist is and I speak for myself, you're very emotional and you believe so deeply in what you're doing. It's so easy to see the world as black and white, and to try and understand someone else's position, especially when you're lobbying or trying to bring them along to your point of view, is really important. Trying to create those win-wins for the opposition, if you will, was also really important. I talked about how we went to the mayor's office in the Hunters Point shipyard story and said, here's an alternative for you. And they said, forget it. I felt like, okay, I'd thrown out that opportunity of an alternative. I'd worked hard to figure that out. They had no incentive to want to try and do that. But once they said, okay, no, we're not interested in your alternative, we don't care about you at all, then I was like, yeah, okay, I'm not gonna get any help from you. I got it. So I'm gonna have to switch gears and find other people. I didn't try and build that bridge, although let me tell you, that mayor considered the bridge with me forever burned. But because she ended up losing and I ended up winning. I mean, so, but that wasn't my intention, but that was the perception in the mayor's office at the time. I won, they lost. So, there was nothing I could do about that because I still cared about trying to help the people I was trying to help. Does that answer your question?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, come on, you got to start asking me questions, otherwise I'm just going to get up here and bore you to death. So.
You mentioned Governor Jerry Brown, and I wondered, what do you like that Governor Jerry Brown is doing today for environmental issues?
Well, I think that his talk at the Geophysicists Union, which I just happened to YouTube yesterday, I would highly recommend it. It's 6 or 7 minutes of some of the most progressive political conversation you'll ever hear from a politician. That's very real. And as for me, it made me really proud to be a Californian. So his talk at the Geophysicists Union was really focused on if we don't believe that climate change science is real, and if the federal government is considering not taking those measurements and keeping that data, California is going to keep that data because it's actually really important. Climate change is real. So I'm really glad that he believes in science and believes in climate change and is really willing to put forth a direction and an opportunity for California. So I'm really proud about that. I would guess if I was sitting in your seat, I'd have some concerns about tuition and a lot of other things. And you know far more about that because you're much more deeply in that. But I will just say that as somebody who could work full-time and go to school full-time when I was in school, the fact that that is not possible right now is a shame on any California voter that we've allowed that to happen. And I'm not saying that just because I'm the parent of a college student, but as something that is the implicit pact, I think that all Californians have for future generations. And so that's my personal belief. But you know a lot more about those kind of issues than I do.
We have a couple of design challenges at San Jose State that are driven by the idea of solving community problems. One is a program called EPICS. It's a study, and we have a prototyping challenge. And I'm interested, the Resilient by Design project, has that inspired many sort of high-tech development sort of projects or simple solutions? Could you talk a little bit about some of the ideas that people have put forward?
So we haven't really launched it from a Bay Area perspective, and I think that the question of how technology and how the Bay Area responds to design thinking was of great interest to the Rockefeller Foundation, and that's why they funded this project. The solutions which arose from the Rebuild by Design competition, you can Google that, were largely natural solutions. But what was different about the design competition is, and I've run many design competitions, is that the way that we often think about them is a lot of time is spent defining the problem, handing it over to a design team, and saying, oh, you wise design team, go off to your corner and come up with your solution. And then maybe government will like it, maybe not, we'll see what y'all come up with. That's actually not a very productive way to run a design competition if you really want to make change and really want to implement things. So what Resilient by Design assumes is that we have some idea of what the challenges are, we have some idea of where our vulnerable communities are, but we're not going to spend a huge amount of time defining in excruciating detail the problem that we want design teams to solve. So design teams under the Resilient by Design competition spend a 2-month period out at the sites studying from different people that we will bring in to talk about that. And that means ecological, environmental, ornithology, hydrology, seismology, all the different ways that we can think about the region. But they do that embedded in communities. So they're sitting side by side with people whose homes have flooded, or people who are worried about the impacts of sea level rise in their communities. So it's a togetherness project, and the design teams then have to work really deeply within those communities to come up with the solutions, because to win the competition, you have to demonstrate community support. So why does that matter? Well, at the end of the day, government will only be as responsive to a design solution as the pressure put upon government, because that's the way that it works, right? So if community groups say, hey, we love this idea, we want to see this idea happen in our community, government's going to say, well, yeah, okay, great, everyone agrees to that? That's so much easier than the way we usually do political process, which is much more winner take all. If that's the way we're going to do our process, then we have that opportunity then to work collaboratively on actually implementing something that's going to work. Because it's a complicated world to get anything built, as you all know. So yeah, prototyping is really easy. Actually making things happen is far more difficult because of the regulatory nature of the Bay Area. It takes a much longer time. So to have people stick with it, who are in the community saying, we really want this to happen over time, is the difference in California for something happening and not happening.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank everybody here for your attention, and thank you again, Margie, for a great talk. Oh wait, I forgot, this is the last one. This is my last
challenge to all of you. Networks matter. If you are smart, you're going to find me on LinkedIn. You're going to say you're a student at San Jose State, and you're going to link to me. That's my one advice to all of you. So
definitely have
always
more
try
than-
and do that,
You'll get
okay?
over 500 connections.
Say it again.
You'll get over 500 connections for sure.
Do it, because you have the gift that I didn't have when I was starting out.